so.
Well, why don't we do the minutes?
Okay. I'll wait for Ellen. Ellen is holding this up. All righty.
Michelangelo Lasso's not here?
No, that was the issue.
Get a last-minute conflict.
Okay. This is the regularly scheduled Town of Nantucket Board of Appeals meeting Wednesday, June 10th, 2015. Can I get an approval of the agenda as written/amended? All right, all those in favor. Any further discussion? No? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, how about the minutes of May 14th, 2015? I read them, they seem fine to me.
I'll make a motion.
Any further discussion? No? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so therefore, well, I was going to, okay. So we were going to have just a very general, time out. Very general discussion about the notion of special meetings, and not specific to anything, any one application. How does the board feel about them? Opposed across the board? Are there special circumstances as to when it might work? And we do occasionally do it.
I mean, if it's an emergency, some houses that we've seen go off the block, and it falls into that category where it is in fact an emergency, then I'm open to that. But otherwise, if it's just going to accommodate somebody's schedule, if they can't make one.
What about if the board is arguably not serving the public in that we can't get a forum for several months?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, my general feeling is I'm opposed to them in general, but in this situation, especially since if Mark's going away, or Mark isn't available for the next regularly scheduled meeting, and my feeling is that I have no problem having a special meeting to accommodate this applicant based on that fact.
Well, again, not specific to one applicant, but the notion you are open to suggestion depending on the circumstances of each and every case. Having said all that, I mean, I do think that we have had a few problems, not across the board, but we just have to maybe all re-examine our. And I'm not talking about anyone specific, but just make sure that we can fulfill our commitment in terms, it's only once a month. And, if for some reason anybody thinks they can't fulfill the commitment, then they should let me know. On a longer term basis. We all miss meetings, but. Okay, so having said that, I am not sitting on the first application. Wait a minute, where am I?
Yeah, you are. They're taking the new business out of order.
Oh, so this is another thing. Let's discuss this. Can we take new business? Okay. That doesn't seem right. So I am not sitting on Shimo Hills LLC. So, and so that leaves. Who else is here? Anybody?
No, just those three.
So I'm going to disassociate myself at this point. So who wants to take over? Kieran? You're our longest standing member. Come on, man. Come on, you got to. I can't. So, and then I believe the applicant is going to, I don't know what he's going to do, but you guys figure it out.
138. Okay. Saving some time rifling through this process.
Yeah. Who's the chair? Was it Mark?
No, it's Karen.
Karen. Okay. I'm pretty sure he said no, but.
Shimo Hills, application 2015, 10 North Road, for the applicant.
Sure. Stephen Cohen, but before we technically open the hearing, I just want to find out, so essentially what we have here is a three-person board for an application for variance, which you need 4 votes for variance, so you couldn't issue it. So we are automatically moving to the next meeting, but at the next, because there are 3 members of the board that can't sit on this because of conflicts, we are potentially already looking at the next meeting where at least 1 member won't be here. And my client would really like to have 5 members sitting on it since it's a variance. So I would request, due to the inability of the board to provide a quorum, that you would consider a special meeting. And if you would consider that, then I would ask you to open the hearing solely for the purpose of continuing. And if you are not open to doing that, then I would ask you to not open the hearing so that we can just go to the next meeting.
What do the other board members feel?
In this situation, I would be willing to attend a special meeting.
Me too.
Agreed. Feel the same way. So, what would we have to do?
You have to open the hearing so that I don't have to advertise.
Okay.
So you technically open it, you can or cannot discuss it, you can just simply make a vote ruling to continue to a date to be determined of a special meeting.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Make that motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much.
Do you have to go to a date certain, or just?
I'm going to work with everybody via email to find the closest date possible for everybody who is able to attend. Hopefully next week, and I'll let you all know.
And you have to notice it
Yeah.
72
I have to post it 48 hours in advance on the town website.
I represent the property owner, and I'm concerned with that. I think that if you don't continue it today to a date certain, that we do have to re-advertise it. And I therefore would request that perhaps you
Okay.
continue it to a date certain, and then if that date doesn't work,
We can
continue
do
it again
because
from that.
The only person who, I don't know about Michelangelo Ostro's availability, that is the problem. I have not heard back from him, I did request some information, I did not hear back specifically as to dates. I do know Susan McCarthy's availability as to a date certain per se. So that was my issue.
I understand, but I'm just concerned that otherwise we, as I say, would have to re-advertise, and we're dealing with further delays in that situation.
Does anybody happen to know about Michelangelo Ostro's?
Well, worst case scenario, if you don't mind, we continue to a date certain, and if only
Modify
3
that
more
date.
can show up to that date, you'll then
You continue it again.
again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So just pick a date, don't worry about Michelangelo.
As to Susan McCarthy, she is available after 1 p.m., or at 1 p.m. anytime on the 18th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, or 25th.
18th, 19th?
Yep,
Not the 19th, not the 22nd. I mean, the 18th would work for me.
the 18th.
I should be good with that.
Okay. 6:18, 1 p.m. Okay, I will confirm where the meeting will take place, because I'll have to make sure about availability.
All right.
I have another procedural question, just so that everybody is due. So the neighbors do not get re-notified. Arguably, the neighbors got notice once.
This will be posted on the town website. Anybody who is a subscriber to the notifications,
The town
and or
clerk.
anybody who checks, will see the agenda as posted 48 hours in advance. I'll probably post it sooner than that on the town website.
And the town clerk.
And I believe you've had no, from looking at the file, I don't believe you've had any correspondence from anyone.
I had no
And unless someone is here today, I think everybody's had, adequate notice of it.
I've had no written concerns submitted.
Obviously, are you voted on?
Well, I know. Is there anybody else who came specifically for this today?
Thanks for the effort, so.
Well, I don't want, it's the neighbors.
We appreciate your concern for the abutters, Mr. Non-Chairman.
Okay, so we're good?
We're good.
Okay, so the 18th, and you'll check with Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks indeed.
The motion was to continue this, it's been opened, it's been continued to a special meeting on June 18th at 1 p.m.
All right, moving on. So now we're on to old business 76-11, Sagem's Path LLC. So who's sitting on this?
I don't have to sit on it.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. For the record, Andrew Singer, attorney on behalf of the applicant. We appreciate your time again reviewing this as the construction proceeds. We're here. I submitted a filing for you. There are 3 issues that we wanted to discuss with you. The first are a few technical changes that we'll discuss. There's one substantive issue and one process question that Eleanor had raised. With your permission, I think it might just be easiest for me to point out those sections in the amended and restated comprehensive permit where we've asked for changes. I did submit a redlined copy for that. We could just go through those, and then ultimately, I know Mr. Pesci is here, who's been intimately involved on the site, and he has a report to give as well. So if that's acceptable to you, Mr. Chairman, and the board, I could just go through. I'll point you out to the page and the change.
Works for me.
Okay. First change is at the top of page 11. There was a stray reference to the NEF, New England Fund Guidelines. We'd removed all of them before. That one snuck through. We missed it. The subsidizing agent at the state wants it out.
Time out for 1 second.
Sure.
Your page 11.
Our pages are not.
Oh, did they? Okay. It's condition 2.
Page 27. Yeah, just call out the condition.
All right, I'll do it. Condition
Please.
2. Yep.
It's on page 27.
I see it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
NEF guidelines.
Yeah, condition 2, it's about the 5th to the last line. So that's just a strikeout.
Yep.
The next one is in condition 4G. You will see the first about 8 lines are in there as new. Actually, that is language that was in the original decision, and when we amended it a few times, it inadvertently got dropped out. Eleanor caught that, so we thank you for that. So we put that back in. At the end of those underlined language is the one substantive issue, and I just want to point it out now, but jump over it, because that is something that will be addressed when Mr. Pesci gives his report, and that requested potential change is to change the minimum tree caliper from 4 inches to 2.5 inches, and that was something that came about through the on-site inspections that have been going on. So if we'll discuss that later. The first part of 4G, as I said, is just adding language in that was already in the original decision. There are no changes to that part.
There is a change from 4-inch to 2.5.
No, except for that. Yeah, if you take out the 2.5-inch caliper and just leave it minimum 4-inch caliper, it's the exact same language. So that part's the same. If we get to that substantive change, that would be a change. You're correct, Mr. Poor. But if not, it would stay as it was before.
Okay.
You're correct. Condition 8. This, again, all of these were driven by talkings with a subsidizing agent, and the next few, which are the last few that I'm going to mention, all are the same thing. You have approved through the process conducting the construction in Phase 1 and Phase 2, and what these next few changes I'll mention to you are requested by the state to reflect the phasing. That's not only in this document, it's also in the First Amendment to the Declaration of Covenants that we submitted. All it's the same issue. Wanting to just clarify that the infrastructure, for example, in Condition 8 is being built in phases, and that the homeowners association will be taking over the responsibility per phase. The applicant will be responsible for all of that until the phase is complete. And so that's what is in Condition 8. It is the same change in Condition 14. Where we redlined it, talking about the split rail fence. For example, if you've been to the site, that fence, the demarcation fence, is up for Phase 1, and it'll be put up for Phase 2 once they actually get into the woods for that. And it also talks about the maintenance is per phase, and it just discusses when the homeowners association takes over versus the applicant. That's Condition 14. And then Similarly, condition 18 is the exact same change. It's about almost halfway through the paragraph, and it talks about, again, management and the infrastructure for the particular phase. So that's it for the comprehensive permit itself. Those are the only written changes in the comprehensive permit that we're requesting. In the declaration, there's a First Amendment to Declaration of Protective Covenants. The reason we submitted that is that in the comprehensive permit, it does state that any changes to this document need to be reviewed by the board. The changes in this document are the exact same I just mentioned. They introduce the concept of the phasing and define it for purposes of the Declaration of Protective Covenants, which is what we just discussed in the comprehensive permit itself. Those are the technical changes. They're very, and we're happy to talk about any of them, but that's what those are. As for the process question, Eleanor had raised the question in some previous 40Bs, the board has imposed a covenant requirement, as you would do with a planning board subdivision, and you get a release of covenant when a lot is sold, and in some 40Bs you have not in the past. In this one, for Sachem's Path, you did not impose a separate covenant mechanism. However, you did do so, or I believe in looking at the decision, that you effectively did in a couple ways, even though it's not called a covenant with a release of covenant. First is that until we get the final approval from the state, we cannot proceed with any of the house construction. The second is and Eleanor had gone through this, there were at least half a dozen, maybe more places in the comprehensive permit where, in order to get a building permit and in order to proceed, we need to satisfy conditions satisfactory to, and it's the zoning enforcement officer who's listed in the decision itself. So, for example, this question came up, just so you know, in connection with building the 2 model homes that you allowed to be built. The applicant would like to start constructing those in July. And so the question came up, do we need a covenant release? And I don't believe, this is the process question, I don't believe we do, but if you look at condition 7, and this is why I said there's a de facto requirement here, at the end of condition 7, it talks about the fact that prior to any marketing of the units, the zoning enforcement officer must make a determination that it can be safe access by the public to the model homes. And in the sentence before, it talks about no use of these marketing models other than for marketing purposes shall be allowed until such time as the CO is duly issued for them. And so, in effect, what we have in the decision is a requirement that all of the infrastructure has to be safe and adequate access in order to be able to utilize those structures for residential purposes. And that's the purpose of what a planning board is doing a covenant when they impose one, is to ensure that that infrastructure gets in. And so we had mentioned, Eleanor, that I would raise this issue with you. I don't believe any changes are needed, but there was maybe a desire for some clarification just to make sure both sides are on the same page vis-a-vis the comp permit and the building permit applications that they're going to submit, hopefully in the next few weeks, for the model homes. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the substantive question that I mentioned, which is the tree caliper. With me, should have introduced her at the beginning, is Adrian Danner from HAC, who has been meeting on site almost weekly with the construction team, and Mr. Pesci. They've been meeting many times, and I know there was some, I'll let them get into more detail if necessary, but I know there was some discussion about if there would be actual growing advantages to having 2.5-inch caliper trees as opposed to the 4-inch caliper trees. There's also a question of attempting to rein in some of the cost overruns that there have been, and so there was a discussion about that as a possibility. It's not something that has to happen, but it was something that is on there for discussion with the board, and I don't know if it makes sense to have that discussion more after Mr. Pesci's given his report, and I don't know how you would like to look at both if you want to review those technical changes first, then the process question, and then jump to that last, what order you would like to do it in, whatever makes the most sense for you.
Why don't we hear Mr. Pesci for now? Just give us an overview of how things are going, and then we'll get to the nitty-gritty.
Good evening, everybody. For the record, I'm Ed Pesci of Pesci Engineering, your zoning consultant, engineering consultant. The Sachem's Path project got a little bit of the same problem everybody had this winter. It ran behind schedule a little bit because of the weather and the freezing and really hard construction conditions, but it has made up the ground. So today, we're approaching the end of Phase 1, and the Phase 1 is the beginning of the road left and right as you go down into the site. So I think most of you are familiar with that. I actually have a plan here if you'd like me to show you approximately the limits. But the infrastructure is in, minus the detention basin. The final bioretention basin is almost done. We're waiting for soil testing to be done by the UMass Extension Center that actually is doing this to give them the information on the organic content of the soil so the proper soil mix can be provided. Also, the other missing piece that's under construction, final construction this week and next week, is the pump station for the wastewater collection system. Final wiring is being done at the end of the week, and then we'll be doing a startup with the DPW to make sure that that works. As you can see by driving by the site, the roadway, the sidewalk, split rail fence, as was mentioned, have all been installed. So in the next 2 weeks, there's some landscaping that needs to be done. And as a result of that discussion a couple weeks ago, I'd say that we're making very good progress by meeting every couple of weeks, but we had discussion about the acquisition of 4-inch caliper trees. And really the problem that the contractor was having with just getting them on the island. So availability was the biggest problem. Landscape architect on the project had mentioned that he preferred 2 to 2.5-inch trees, and I did a little bit of research and got to back up the position that he had, which is as follows. When you put a 4-inch caliper tree that's been at a nursery for 4 years under perfect growing conditions, when it gets placed in the actual on-site real conditions, and now it's being watered and treated a little bit differently, it doesn't grow as fast or as strongly as a 2-inch tree, 2.5-inch tree that hasn't been there as long, and actually over time they've proven that the 2.5-inch tree overtakes the growth of the 4-inch tree, and you're better off with the 2-inch tree. Obviously, it improves the availability for the contractor to be able to put it in and makes things work better. So I recommended that change be accepted. I would certainly recommend to the board here, subject to your approval, that it also be accepted. So that's where that discussion came from. Overall, I'd say the project is going, very, very well, catching up on some of the lost time with the weather. The project team is very cooperative, very helpful, and certainly very knowledgeable. Don't have any major issues. And before I jump off for your questions, I want to say a personal thank you. It's my first time being in front of you in literally 3 years, because I've been home a year, and before that I was on active duty for 2 years and deployed in a year and a half of that 2 years in the Middle East. But I certainly appreciate all the support the board has given me over the years, and continuing to support me in your assistance for this project and others. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so it seems that there are three questions. The tree caliper, whether or not, well, let me go to the covenant issue first, Andrew. Ed Marchand seemed to think if for some reason we want to put a covenant release in, we can do that at this point. Is that correct, Eleanor? Did I read that correctly?
We can, or we can just use the existing conditions as opposed to the CP.
Right. So I'm just saying that is an option if we'd like to do that. The other option, as Eleanor just said, is we keep it as is with a variety of protections that they can't do X without doing Y, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The covenant is obviously just one more safeguard. If we want to insert it, we can do that. So why don't we take them one at a time? How do we feel about that?
Would it be easier for a homeowner to understand the restrictions as a basis of a covenant in terms of what they're buying into and how that's being released than the comprehensive permit?
I don't think it matters to the homeowner. It's not a covenant like the covenant housing program. It's just a covenant that's, it's basically like Form J.
So how about for the banks? Would they be more comfortable with something like that?
That I have no idea of.
It's not something that is a concern from our side as far as we know, and it's not been imposed in all 40Bs that you've done, so it's worked without it, it's also worked with it, presumably.
I don't think it's a big deal either way. It's, again, just one more safeguard if we want to.
Why do you think that we didn't think about putting it in when it first came through? Because we were beaten down and ready to move on? Or
Well, I don't think it was ever a negotiation point. I think it was simply the older members on the board forgot to mention that we had done it in the past. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably true to some degree, but I think the chairman just forgot.
I could have come up with a few other reasons, but I figured.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, one of the, if it's not something that I think would be applicable to the model homes, because they're not being sold at this point, but one of the things also for you to recall or remember for the board, if in fact there was a covenant and a covenant release required, that means you're going to be seeing somebody up here 40 more times every time a lot wants to be sold. And so I think one of the things you were looking at, I'm not sure if it was forgot so much, is the process. There was a conscious decision and decision. The zoning enforcement officer is listed as the sign-off person in many places. So I think that might have been a way to try to keep us or members of everyone from having to come back to you repeatedly.
Yeah,
As much as we like you,
even with the covenant, I did not envision you coming back each and every lot, one at a time, 40 different times. I would have assumed you would have 10 ready to go, and there'd be some mechanism to get that sign off. But if you're thinking you're one way or the other, I don't, have a strong feeling about it.
You've done it in the other 40Bs that
I
you
don't-
have done in the past?
Did Abrams Quarry have it? Yes. Michael and I, in our defense, sat on Abrams Quarry and did not. The chairman was lax at that time by not putting it in. He will remain nameless.
Well, they did intend, obviously, to build all of them at the same time, which they did. So
Right.
that was the advantage.
I
Michael
believe,
Scott had market rate homes, has market rate homes,
right.
and there is a covenant in that case. So, but not with Abrams Park.
I will say, I thought we did a reasonably good job of putting safeguards in there so that you could not get a building permit until much of this, a lot of steps were taken. The covenant just is one more safeguard.
And if I may, through you, Mr. Chairman, as you just said, to reiterate that, the building department and the HTC are obligated to review the CP. It's as if it's a special permit. So they have to go through that to make sure that certain conditions are met, and they will necessarily do so before they issue building permits.
Yeah, as we'll see later, sometimes but anyway, doesn't matter.
So would people have to come here before they apply for a building permit?
Well, arguably, the developer would come saying, I want to build these 15 homes, 10 homes, 6 homes.
Right.
Please release
But
lots.
they would have an appeal period in the whole 9 yards.
I don't think it's like
No
that.
appeal period.
No,
So
there's no
granted-
appeal period with.
Granted the day that we vote on it.
It would be, normally with a covenant, if you look at the one, Eleanor had sent out the one from Rugged Scott, it's actually, there was a 2 or 3 page document that was signed, it was recorded, it was done in lieu of a bond, it was at the registry, and then the example of the covenant release that she sent, I think, was just one of the lots, lot 14, I think it was. And so that was signed by the board members, and so the covenant was on record, and then each lot release, whether it was lot by lot or 10 at a time or whatever, was presented to the board. The board obviously signed it, and it was recorded at the Registry of Deeds as well. It has nothing to do with the declaration of protective covenants, for what the homeowner says, as you said. I do believe in this case, we're trying to keep the process as simple as possible. Given all the other safeguards, we'd ask if you would not want to add it at this time, but it was just something to clarify with you. That's why we're having the conversation.
It puts all the burden on the ZEO.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
It's fine with me.
We'll leave that.
Okay? So, Mark?
I'm just looking at all the conditions, that are on page 36, and I think we've pretty much covered what needs to be done, and there's so many safeguards already in place. I don't see the need for it unless everybody else wants to go there.
I'm okay with it as is.
Okay.
Vote on these one at a time?
I don't think that's a voting issue
No,
as much
no.
as it was a
Procedural.
discussion issue. So we can go next to the tree caliper.
Yeah, and I have a question.
Go ahead.
Just to the point of, it being in the long run a better solution, when would the trees be planted? Can they be planted ahead of time to get some growing in there so that they're 4 inches by the time people are beginning to occupy? I think what we didn't want to have happen is have these teeny little trees that look kind of ridiculous put in there.
And I think the question also is, I know certain landscaping, and I'll tell to both of you, certain landscaping's going in next week, which is some of the border, and the decision just talks about trees on the landscaping plan shall not include pitch pines and shall be at least 4-inch caliper. It doesn't necessarily specify, these aren't per lot, obviously not going to put a tree on a lot until there's a house. I'm not sure if it was referring to those border trees.
It was the border trees, I'm pretty sure. It was
Roger.
The ones along the streetscape that we
Well, it was everything, I think. Well, we were, if I recall, very concerned about sort of the landscaping getting short end of the stick,
Right, at the very end.
or the tiny tree, if you will. And so it was a discussion point. It wasn't just we didn't just throw it in there. We discussed it at length.
Right.
And yeah, unless there's some, the notion of not being able to get them.
Well, that's different than the growth.
Well, number one, you can get them.
You can get them, you just have to order them in advance.
It seems like every other landscaper out here gets, bigger trees than that,
That's
so.
a pretty big project, massive project to have 2.5-inch caliper
Yeah,
trees.
Unless they were, my own thought is if they were going to put them in, and I'm no landscaper, so I don't know when they would be appropriately planted, but as soon as possible, so that when these houses are in completion, that they've had a couple years of growing, and then maybe at that point, they're looking better.
Well, but even better if they were 4 and became
Unless
6.
Yeah, well, I know. I was
It's not
listening
going to
to,
happen in 2 years, but we're not going to go from 2.5-inch caliper to 4-inch caliper
in 2 years.
in 6 years.
And this is ultimately, so this was, it was something that came up during the construction meetings. It's, if the board is more comfortable with the 4-inch trees, the applicant we're fine with that.
Let's move on, then.
Yeah, so we just wanted to raise it. It was discussed in the field. Ed, if
And to answer your question, we were not planning to put the trees in this summer. We're waiting till the fall period, which is the best time to do that. So that is part of the things that Phase 1 won't include, the Phase 1 sign-off won't include, but a bond, I believe there's a cash, right, that will be included in that for them to get to that point. So it made, we were thinking about what makes sense and not having to replant trees that died because they, didn't survive the summer. It's the wrong time to plant and so on. So we were, again, thinking about the survivability of the tree.
I think if they're planted properly and cared for properly, the 4-inch trees, I've seen hundreds of them survive, so I'm getting a sense that one's not going to fly. So can we move off of that?
Yep.
What about the other changes to the language, really mostly having to do with the notion that the whole thing is phased, and therefore some responsibilities, at least in some of these, shift to the homeowners association before the entire project is complete? Again,
but only per phase.
only per phase, but my recollection was, again, this was a discussion point, that we talked about at length, and the notion was the developer should remain responsible till the end, not the homeowners.
Absolutely.
I agree with
So.
that.
I guess Andrew's not interested.
Yes.
Kidding. So,
I do remember that being a big part of it. That had to do with the money that was withheld.
Right.
Okay.
so
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just as I was clarifying with Adrian, is one of the reasons the HCD wanted this language in there is because the financing is being done per phase. They wanted to see everything complete per phase. And one of the ways you complete it is this association where owners are paying into that association once they own the houses would be responsible per phase. So that was, as I understand it, why DHCD, as the subsidizing agent, was asking for those changes.
Again, I'd have to hear more as to why the subsidizing agency wouldn't want the developer to remain vested and in charge and paying until the whole project was complete. I mean, again, this came up, and it was not talked about for a minute or two. So, I don't know, how does everybody else feel? Mark, same?
Yeah, clearly, I don't want this to go to the homeowners association in advance of completing the project. I mean, multiple discussions were had on this. I think we were pretty clear that we want the developer vested in this thing to the end.
Yeah, and I got to believe there's a mechanism in which you can make that work with the subsidizing agency, and because I just don't understand why they would want otherwise, frankly, if the project is half complete.
Well, one thing just to bear in mind is as the project's being done in phases, the developer is obviously out there now, they're building phase 1, and when phase 1 is complete, however many units they own or don't own, they are still involved. They also are solely responsible for phase 2, and so the developer is still involved. The homeowners association is there. You know, once you sell the first 15, 16 houses that are in phase 1, that association is there. You have individual owners. You have people who are responsible in the neighborhood because they're owning in it. And it, normally in a subdivision, once you're paying in and you are living there and that section of the subdivision is complete, it would be logical to have that be a completed process. This isn't letting the developer off. It's not that there's going to be, no monies for ongoing maintenance of phase 1. In the comprehensive permit, as you recall, there is the per lot contribution that the developer is making to start. Each unit, the developer is paying in up to the time that it sells the lot. You then have the lot being sold and the homeowners are paying. So the money that is going to be there is there, and it will be there. And this is just the control of just the homeowners association itself, so that they're taking active interest and control of the subdivision they're living in. And again, the developer is still there because, as you know, phase 2 builds, integrally off phase 1, and so it's not like the developer's not there anymore.
That's a good point, because the success of phase 2 has a lot to do with the way phase 1 looks while they're trying to sell phase 2. So I would think the developer would want to stay active in phase 1.
And I'm not saying the developer is not going to. I mean, it's a very involved developer, as you've heard, as Ed can attest to. But looking at it, and I can't quote you chapter for verse what DHCD is saying. I can just tell you what came back from them and the why that they said it. And we're trying to keep the process moving. It has been moving well, weather-related aside. And so we're trying to keep that moving. And these were changes that they sent down requesting as part of the final approval. And I don't think there is any harm in approving it. I don't believe that you're going to get a situation where there's going to be no one maintaining either phase as they are built. And there are, as you noted, Mr. Chairman and others, there are numerous protections and safeguards built into the comprehensive permit, and those all are going to still remain.
Well, they're not all related to this, though. I mean, the only reason it's sticking point for me is we talked about this at length, and it was the notion that the developer stays involved and is involved. I know they're still going to be involved. Obviously, they're doing phase 2, but it was the fact of the homeowner should not bear the responsibility of maintaining and ensuring that phase 1 stays in good shape as phase 2 is being built. So, I'm willing to say, if you show us a letter or language or some explanation from whomever is telling you to do this, we can revisit it. But
clearly, from my vantage point, when phase 1 is constructed, we talked about the last 2 inches of pavement going on top of it. And the question is, when's that going to be done, and what's going to happen during Phase 2 with the heavy equipment that's rolling over Phase 1? Who's responsible for that? Should be the homeowner association.
No, it should
No,
not.
it should not be.
And once the homeowners sign on and take responsibility for Phase 1, they're responsible arguably for any damage, et cetera, et cetera. So, we were clear about it, and I think that you should work hard with whomever is telling, to just try to change that back to the original, or keep the original language.
We will, go back to the HCD and ask them either what you just said or for a letter, establishing what they're saying to us. I would just like to reiterate, however, if you want to consider, is that when the developer is building Phase 2 and they're going over to whatever extent they are Phase 1, they're going to have rights over that, and they're going to have maintenance responsibilities as well. So it's not as if the developer finishes Phase 1, the homeowners association's in charge, and while the developer's building Phase 2 and they've got dump trucks going up and down, they destroy the road, and Phase 1's going to have to build it. They're going to be responsible for whatever they cause. Now, if the picket fence, or the split rail fence, for example, gets damaged in a storm, nowhere near anything that is happening in Phase 2, it's that type of thing where the homeowners association would be responsible, or if there is a light is out or something else. So just understand, it's not as if the developer would have no involvement with Phase 1 after they're done, nor any physical connection, because the two are connected and they are responsible for what they're doing.
Shouldn't that just have to be made clear somehow in language of what their responsibility will be then after Phase 1, if we do allow them to do this?
Well, yeah, I guess.
I mean,
Well, can they-
Absolutely. Look, where are the construction vehicles going to be parked in
Right.
Right,
Phase
there has to
2?
be more information for
Yes,
us
they're going to be parked up on the top of the curb
right,
in Phase 1.
damaging the,
Yeah, I just don't see, if Phase 2, if you came to us and said Phase 2 is not happening, and we're pulling the plug on Phase 2, then I could see it, reverting everything to Phase 1. But until Phase 2 is complete, there's a lot, there's going to be a lot of activity there. And
Well, also remember, I think the goal, and I just confirmed this with Ed, the goal of the approvals as well was to, at least in theory, that most construction activity for Phase 2 would be coming from South Shore over the emergency, yes. Right, so, and that's a gravel section now, wasn't required to be paved at this point. And so there is a goal, and it was conscious in your decision, to try to separate the construction as much as possible. I'm not going to say no truck will ever go over the roads in Phase 1, but most of them, the idea is to come over South Shore.
well, I think you're hearing what we're saying.
No, we're hearing what you're saying,
I'm hoping
and
you're going to go back to whomever, HTC, not HTC.
the DHCD. We will go back. I cannot make any promises, obviously, but we will go back.
State our case for us, that, and, our objection to this, and hopefully the comprehensive permit as it was originally written can stand.
Okay. If that
Now,
is...
come on back.
If that is the case, if I could ask the one thing in case they do, would you vote to approve the change where that stray phrase, NEF guidelines, is removed? So at least if they do make a change, that language would just be out of the decision. That was in condition...
Just as a matter of course, no. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, I don't think that's...
That's in condition 2.
Bad. Page 27.
Yeah.
See it?
yeah.
Anybody
So
have?
we'd approve that, and then the changes to language on page 28, or does that have to do with Phase 2 as well? Other than the
No,
change to the 2.5
that's the-
I think
Oh.
it needs to be inclusive again. It was omitted at some point, now it's being brought back in, basically.
But I think I think you should, just for clarification purposes, since we're not going to the 2.5 inch, I think if you voted to change condition 2 as requested, and to change condition 4G to insert the language that got inadvertently dropped, but leave it at 4-inch caliper.
Right. We could do that
Yes.
today, just nothing to do with the phasing. Correct?
That works for me. Insert the language and 4-inch caliper and
Strike and the NEF guidelines in page 27.
then strike. Okay. So that
Everything
was
else is about
condition 2.
phasing. So should I make, is that being made as one motion?
I think we can do that as one. But, you know, just be very specific that that is what we're voting on, and not the, I mean, we can go so far as to say not the changes to 8, 14, 18, blah, blah, blah. Any
I
others?
think that's in the Declaration of Protective Covenants.
And the declaration. Does that work for everybody?
I'm good with that.
So you're asking the applicant to return in a month with some sort of substantiation from DHCD?
Not necessarily.
No, if we don't
What
make-
we're really asking them is not to come back. But if they want to come back, they can come back as many times as they'd like.
I would just submit another letter at that point.
Right.
So, yeah, we wouldn't, there would be no further meeting after this unless we applied again.
Okay, so
Right.
basically withdrawing from that.
Okay, so Lisa, you sounded like you were ready to
So
make,
I'll make a motion to approve the changes to condition F2, striking the words "and the NEF guidelines," and to condition, sorry, what number is that?
4G.
4G.
Adding the language that was missing, but keeping the 4-inch caliper trees.
okay,
And we will not be approving any of the changes to condition, what is that, 8,
8,
14, 18, is that it?
yeah, and,
And the Declaration of Protective Covenants, right?
okay, you know what I should have done, thank you for that motion. Before we get to
Public.
to that, yeah, is there anybody out there who came specifically to speak about this? No. Sorry, I didn't ask before. Okay, so that motion's been made. Is there
I'll
a
second
second? Okay, any further discussion? No. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just
Oh, watch.
Just wanted to say that in the next couple of weeks, this Phase 1, so-called Phase 1, will be close to closure, and we'll be doing a punch list inspection. You'll be seeing a report from me as a result of that. The design engineer and I are going to do one together, so the contractor has one list to go off of. So,
I mean, not that I'm looking for more to do.
No, I see.
Especially at this time of year, but I wouldn't mind if you just shoot me an email. Maybe I can join you.
hey, I'd
Does
love
that
to
make
do
sense?
that.
Does that make any sense? I know Lisa would like to.
Let me tell you that next Wednesday, the 17th, at 11 o'clock, we have our regularly scheduled project meeting. You're all welcome to attend that. It's at the Nantucket Housing Office, and then we make a site visit.
I'd really.
Eleanor and I usually go to
interested in
that.
a site visit. Oh,
Okay.
you do the meeting and then a site visit?
Correct, right. So noonish usually is when we can do that.
Okay,
Thank you.
And you'll see kind of where they're at with various things that we just talked about.
that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, moving on. 6714 is continued forever, seemingly. So we get to 1915, Susan A. Lynch, Thomas A. Lynch.
What about 47 Monomoy? Where did that go?
Oh,
Skipped me.
sorry. I guess I'm,
10:15. Is that it?
10:15.
oh yeah, there was, I'm sorry. It's too small.
It's too small, yeah.
1015, William F. Hunter, trustee of the 1908 Realty Trust, 47 Monomoy Road, for the applicant.
Who read back in?
Who was,
Okay, yeah, time out here.
who's out?
Well, I sat on
I
it.
I did too.
Michael,
Ed, Karen, Lisa, Mark Ford is taking Susan McCarthy's place, and engineer.
so this is the board. Got it. Okay, I got to bring up one point. I don't think it's an issue, but Mark was noted in the minutes as
As a private
having,
citizen.
having sort of spoken about this.
You're in favor or against, right?
Well, it was,
Information.
He can speak
It was
as a board
information.
member.
What's that?
A board member can speak.
No, I-
No, I know, but when he wasn't on the
I don't
board,
recall that. Okay, I'm out
it's
of it.
specifically in the minutes, I recall it, and it was in the minutes.
I heard it and I read it, and I think it was a pretty innocuous
It was.
comment.
Fine.
That she looked at the drawings.
I had some supporting information.
It's fine with me, I just want to, if you're good with it, are you okay with it?
I'm fine with it. I don't even remember it, so.
Oh, I can attest to it if you want me to right now.
Yeah, wait, let me, is there anybody in the audience who might have an objection to Mark sitting on this? No. Okay, as I remember, it was very innocuous, too. I can read the minutes, if we care. Okay. It works for you. Works for me. Works for me. Okay, let me find the page. Old business.
54.
Thank you.
Or 52 was the letters.
Okay, go ahead.
You ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about all that.
No, it's quite all right. Sarah Alger, the applicant. As you recall, this is a house that was moved from Sconset, determined after the fact that it was over the height when it was in Sconset. It's just a building that's more than 30 feet high. You had asked for some documentation of that, so I submitted, I think, kind of a raft of photographs, both from the HDC file as well as photographs of the house in place. Linda Williams did offer to come and testify to the authenticity of the Sconset photographs, so I suggested we would hold that in abeyance, but if we need her, she's willing to come. I think you can tell pretty clearly the house was just picked up, moved, and put back down.
So,
Go ahead.
And then some dormers were added, but they didn't affect that main ridge. It's that main ridge height that's giving us the
right.
problems.
What does Mr. Kyberg refer to as a retaining wall that significantly altered the grade in his letter? Did anybody else read that?
I did.
I don't know where it is. I'm not understanding that necessarily.
It's a bit of a different question as to whether or not they regrade it.
Yes, that's my question. Did they
Right.
raise the grade here? But you can't tell by these photos if there is any sort of retaining wall, but he refers to one.
Yeah, it's not, it's another question that
You know,
we didn't get to the nub of last
I have
time.
to say,
Go ahead.
when I talked to Peter about this, when he was putting together his letter, he said he wanted to put something in there to prove that the topography was having an effect so that you would have something to hang your hat on in granting the relief.
Well, we appreciate you, Todd.
You had mentioned in the last meeting that the grade was altered because there was some topography changes.
Correct.
Left there by
De minimis, there's a
some
retaining
higher
wall
power.
limitation.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah,
But he's just
it has
saying-
nothing to do with the house.
But it doesn't have to do with the house. I mean, it does, but it doesn't.
Well, unfortunately, we'll never really know because we don't know what the grade was. at
The
start.
grading was done across because otherwise the house would have been in a hole. But even in a hole, it was over, it didn't,
No matter what, it was.
no matter what, it was
feet tall.
always too tall.
Right. No, I understand. I think, Lisa, we all understand that. It was simply another question as to whether or not it was also
Made worse by
32 feet tall plus, put up on a knoll plus.
No, not
graded
on,
up
it's not on a knoll, for sure. It's on a
flat.
flat. It's flat.
Okay.
And the person, the neighbor directly behind, is now supporting us.
Well,
So,
with linkage, it's right. So, anyway, go ahead, Sarah.
I have really nothing else to say. I mean, what
All
else
right.
is there to say? It's a tragic situation. But I think
I
if,
wouldn't
you
go
know,
so far
I
as
think
to
the
say
thing that's
tragic.
tragic about it is if someone had come in when they were moving the house and said, hey, we're trying to save this old house that we can't tear down. We'd like to move it from Sconset to Monomoy, but when it gets there, it's going to be too tall. I don't know that it would have been this big a conversation and this And
Well,
and
I
we
don't-
shot ourselves in the foot, and
I
that's
don't
the
disagree
tragedy.
with you, but it
Tragedy.
leaves the situation open to question when you don't do the proper process
I-
and come in
I-
several years later.
I
and
couldn't agree with you more.
So, I don't think you,
No, I'm not criticizing your process at all. I'm just saying I think it's too bad that it happened this way.
well, we always think it's too bad when people come in after the fact.
I know.
but-
Well, looking at the pictures, though, it doesn't appear that the house is unusually elevated off the ground or anything, so it seems like it was picked up and moved, and
Right, and Mark, going back to your comments, you reviewed the building permit file?
I went to the building department and looked not only at the building department file, but at the HDC file. And clearly, the original application for a certificate of appropriateness to the HDC was not filled out to the level of detail that we normally like to see things happen. So it was a real broad brush look, from my opinion, at that application, even though the drawings, when I scaled the drawings, measured 32 feet. What I think exacerbates this is the HDC had 3 more bites at this apple for approvals for dormers, approvals for roof walk, where they clearly could have seen that this was an issue and didn't. So I'm just surprised it got that far. But the drawings certainly reflect the building was 32 feet high. I didn't see any inappropriate levels of grade changes. We're, bent on preservation out here, so I don't have an issue with this application.
And there was certainly nothing in the application, the building permit file, that referenced ripping off the roof and raising the
No,
ridge.
but the building application did list the building at 30 feet.
Well, yeah, there's some veracity issues here, but
Yes.
this whole...
That's a
that's a
mistake.
mistake. And in the HDC's defense, I don't know why they would have ever looked at the ridge height if nothing was changing on it. They would never have measured the building if you're asking for a roof walk.
There's some commentary in the minutes from different members saying that this building was too big, not too tall.
To move to Monomoy.
Right. It's an appropriate building for Monomoy.
I
It's
think it
just,
looks
Did you
great
say
in Monomoy.
inappropriate?
no, it is an appropriate
I-
building.
Yeah.
I tend to
I think it
agree.
looks great.
I mean, if it's not appropriate there, where is it
I-
appropriate?
Baxter Road.
Good point.
So, is there anybody else who wants to
Anybody in the audience want to speak about this one?
So I'm going to make a motion to approve the relief as requested.
Can we couch that a little bit based on the fact that this was a pre-existing structure and no alterations were made to the
Yes.
construction?
Pre-existing historic structure.
Yes.
Significant.
So we have some precedents for doing this sort of thing?
And
I mean, granted, 10 North Road's going to be coming before us in some fashion
Yes,
where they're
I
looking
agree.
for something else.
I think
And
to
we
put-
need to couch this in a fashion that protects this particular.
I think that's a good idea.
Interest.
Particularly, I could just so much as say that it's a significant
Oh,
historic
absolutely.
structure.
Let's
Absolutely.
not go there, Linda Jr.
Oh, God. If we weren't on tape, I would say something.
Anyway. Okay.
No, I would, are you willing to change your motion to
Yes.
add Mark's? Okay, then I would
Absolutely.
change my second to include Mark's comments.
Okay. So is there any further discussion? No? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience over this long year of continuances, too.
Okay. Now, the aforementioned 1915 Susan A. Lynch, Thomas A. Lynch, for Sakata
I'm sorry?
You want to sit?
It doesn't matter.
Sure.
Avenue. For the applicant. So Jeffrey's sitting, Mark is not.
Okay, let me make a note of my board so that I can write my favorable decision accordingly.
Okay. This is another one.
For the applicants, Arthur Reed, Thomas and Susan Lynch own the property in question up Cisco on what is known as 4 Sakatcha Avenue. They have had that property for about 20 years, and previous owner built the house. In 2010, they decided to make some changes to the house, including an addition and porch, and in connection with that, they hired a residential designer to prepare the application, Val Oliver. Val is here with us today, as are the owners, Tom and Susan Lynch. The plan that she obtained had been prepared by Nantucket surveyors a few years before and stamped by Paul Santos. Unfortunately, the plan had been reduced, and there was confusion about the scale of the plan that she was working from, as she will tell you. And as a result of that, even though the house was built, the addition to the house was built completely in scale with the plan that had been submitted, the fact is that the house winds up, as a result of the difference in scale of the plan, being located 27 feet rather than the required 35 feet from the line of the street. Now, Sakatcha Avenue is not a through street. It's a small side road that runs off the main road in the area of this subdivision, which is an ancient subdivision that was discovered in the 1980s, and the lots were sold off. There are some owners unknown parcels out there, and the land at the end of the road is conservation land. The width of the road in question is 33 feet. I'll show you a picture in just a minute. The traveled area of the road is quite some distance out into this road known as Sakatcha Avenue. So the result is that there is a large area of vegetation which appears to be part of the yard of the Lynch's property that is in fact within the layout of Sakatcha Avenue. I will show you, and we may have some other things as well to show you, but let me start off by showing you the picture that will depict the distance, the apparent distance between the road and the house. I had it in front of me just a minute ago. What did I do with it?
I have some smaller ones.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the big one. Here it is. We can pass this around. This shows, Chairman Mara, the dirt road, and then the large area of vegetation that lies between the paved area and the not paved area, but the unpaved roadway and the nearest corner of the house. The plan which you have in your packet shows that setback as being approximately 42 feet. And in any event, I'd like to ask Val to speak to confirm the fact that this was all, again, a good faith mistake, and how it is that she drew the plan as she did, showing the 35-foot setback. Val?
I'm just going to read a statement that I wrote. As the designer for the Lynch's addition, we actually started in 2009, my drawing error has resulted in the setback encroachment on the corner of the Lynch's front porch. I'm able to see where I went wrong now that we've looked back at it. I used a different scale. I used a 30 scale instead of 20 for the purposes of submitting to HDC and getting a building permit, and the house actually got constructed in 2010. The corner of the porch has is approximately 7'6" intrusion in the setback, but it's just on the corner of the porch. And it's existed for 5 years now, and it only recently came to light because we were going to do some more work on the house and add some stairs in the rear. And by having an as-built done, we found out this problem. The corner of the porch is technically in the setback, but there's actually 42 feet to the constructed private way that's only used by one other house. To my knowledge, it has not had an adverse impact on them that I am aware of, and I think that neighbor actually wrote a letter of support. They didn't have a problem with it. The oversight is mine, and I have learned from this mistake and will, in the future, always have a surveyor stake for the setbacks. I am sorry, and I hope you can forgive this unfortunate error and help me resolve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is correct. The one neighbor that's farther down the road that has an actual house on the property has written a letter, which you have in your packet, in support of the application. I'd also like to ask Mr. Lynch to come up to just explain, his understanding and involvement in the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Tom Lynch. My wife and I purchased the house in 1992. Just historically, we came here on our honeymoon in 1971 and came back every summer. After that, don't cry.
No.
As the years went by, many of the houses were improved, some were moved, larger ones were built, and our house needed some repair, and we thought that in keeping with the neighborhood, we would add some square footage, and fortunately, worked with Val, who we thought did a great job, and improved the house. The neighbors actually came over to the house and congratulated us on how good it looked, and we're so happy with it. I became a resident here in 2012, and sometimes mistakes happen, and we don't think that there is. We know of no hardship imposed upon anyone, given the fact that it's such a small street with so few neighbors, and would respectfully request your approval of the application.
Thank you.
Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Anybody else, or should we start with the board? How does... I don't think anybody else in the audience. Anybody else in the audience want to speak about this one? No.
It's my understanding that there's no letters that exist from any butters. No, I read one in favor. But in terms of opposition, there isn't any?
No. None in the file, no. None here. This is a variance, keep in mind. And the
That makes it much more difficult. Because a special permit, if it's a surveyor's error, it can become a special permit.
It's crazy.
Is that correct?
Well, if it was done.
If Paul Santa or whoever had marked this corner and it was incorrect, they could come in for a special permit.
Well, and I think that was put in as a safeguard to.
Well, why can't that?
Why can't that be everybody? Well, then I could just go locate a building, have it in the setback, and say, "Oops."
It just makes it. It's too bad because it's a much more difficult threshold to meet.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I don't think it should. I believe the inference or the intent of the bylaw is that if you've hired a surveyor and he makes an inadvertent mistake. Anyway, we don't have to debate that particular bylaw, whether it makes any sense.
Well, I was just concerned just because, do we have to meet the variance standard of topography, the different standards in order to get variance relief?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't.
So the only thing that I can see looking at the printed copy is that it doesn't appear to be any closer to the road than the neighbor to the east. If you look at this plan, this house, if you hold up a piece of paper, this house seems to be the same distance off. But if you try to keep it parallel to the road.
I mean, frankly, I have a bit of a problem. Haven't heard a compelling reason other than, I mean, the vegetation of the street, I don't think is, I just.
Well, that was my point about a special permit, is that it allows somebody to come in and say, I screwed up, it seems appropriate, there's nobody against it, but to have to try to turn this into meeting variance standards is hard.
I agree.
And I don't know how you do that.
The only thing I could think of is that in terms of the shape of the lot, it is a non-conforming lot.
I think we've had that discussion before. It's a rectangle.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So
It's just smaller.
Yeah, considerably smaller.
I mean, I think we just have to be careful granting variance relief on something. And I wish it could be somehow come under special permit.
What if, just trying to throw something out there, what if they withdrew and then issued the special permit?
Can they come back with a special
No, I mean,
permit? They can't, right? There's no.
I would like nothing better than to be before you right now applying for a special permit. But there's no provision in the bylaw that allows for a special permit in this situation. It's not a surveyor's error, and that's the one thing that's expressly called out, although the plan that you see shows Paul Santos' name and stamp on it. That was a plan that he had drawn that, again, someone else then wrote in on rather than his showing it incorrectly.
Well, and you can see 30 feet is called out on this plan, and 35 feet, which is called out on the plan, is smaller than 30 feet. So it's fairly obvious that it was a mistake. I mean, not a mistake, just
An error.
an error.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just doesn't seem to meet the criteria for me. But I'm only one vote, so.
Well, given that you have to hang your head on something in terms of variance relief, I'm willing to support this because of the size of the shape of the lot. And I would say in 25 years on this board, this is only the second time I've ever heard anyone admit to making a mistake.
I was going to say that's the first time I've heard it.
And I appreciate that, but I don't think it makes it right, because if that is the criteria for getting variance relief, we'll have people in here falling on the sword every day or every month, and I just don't think that is. It is a porch. It's not even. It's
Solid space. It's open.
It could be rectified. I'm not advocating that.
I was actually saying that from the different perspective.
you
It's
were.
not interior living space.
I just don't think you should benefit because you do, you do poor work in terms of checking things, and it's fairly clear the zoning bylaw is in place for a reason. Whether or not you agree with it or not, it's in place. If someone was building new, they would have to maintain that setback.
I would say that the area that I mentioned within the roadway, the vegetated area, which is a practical matter, is never going to be changed. There's no further development that is likely on this road that provides some justification, I think, for the granting of a variance, the presence of that vegetation and the unlikelihood of its ever being disturbed.
so many things that are able to be granted under special permit that really, I think, should become variances, and then something like this that is an honest mistake that takes place. But because of, I do have some trepidation about coming up with some language just to allow this to be voted through as a variance, as it might open, to Ed's point, open the door for other people to come in who aren't quite as genuine, unfortunately, and take advantage of the situation, so it's tough.
What? Anybody else?
Anybody else? I'm sitting the fence.
Barring any other discussion, then I guess we'll just have to vote. So somebody needs to make a motion, unless we want to talk about it anymore.
Not much to talk about, except, I think Michael stated his opinion on this. What's the option of taking off the deck? Is it really that much of a problem? The deck were to come off?
Oh, it's not a deck, it's
It's a
a
porch.
full-on
It has a roof.
porch.
How much of that porch would have to come off to make it compliant? Could you make it an octagon and cut off both sides and make it symmetrical? I mean, is there a fix to it that, I don't know where the building corner is in relation to the setback?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you have any drawings? We just have the site plan and the,
It would be, within a foot of the corner, so I think the whole front of the porch would have to come off.
well, what about if you cut this porch back and then just left the porch in the front? Maybe that wouldn't look very good, but,
I didn't see what you did.
if you cut this off and then that, so it wasn't a wrap.
Well, but then this would be in there.
Right,
Oh, that's still in there.
yeah,
And this is where the front door is?
right here.
Oh, the front door is here.
I just don't think it meets the variance standard, which we've tried over the years to maintain.
The photo? I don't have-
Photo?
Yeah, what happened to the picture?
It is going to get put in the file.
That would be
I
that.
have more photos if you want.
I was just looking at the exterior, so that would have to come off that whole side.
I mean, in terms of taking the whole thing off, and as miserable as that sounds, if it were designed with the proper setback, that's what the house would have looked like.
I understand that.
So I don't think that is a huge hardship.
It's just a financial,
Yeah.
It is a financial hardship, I agree.
It's not
but
an
I
architect,
wouldn't.
it's not affecting any interior living space, it's not a programmatic hardship. And I don't think the house would look that different without it. I mean, I don't have the other, if you want to show us the other pictures, Val, that might be helpful. But
Have you considered, Val, the options? Have you looked at any potential
We
remedies?
will.
May I make a comment?
Certainly.
Had we known the front porch could have been reduced by 2 feet, the back deck could have been reduced by 2 feet, and the house could have fit the way it looks, but with slightly smaller porches. In my opinion, and in the opinion of the neighbor who wrote, if you took part of the porch off, you would have one ugly-looking house.
I don't think that's a reason for building in the setback, though.
I'm sorry?
I don't think that is a reason to grant variance relief, because it wouldn't have been built this way.
It would have been exactly the same, but it would have been tilted a little, and it would have looked exactly like it looks now.
So
But-
did you move this house?
The house could have been moved back, the back porch could have been potentially cut off. I mean, there's things that you could do, but you would never design the house the way it would look if that portion of the porch was taken off. That's basically what I'm saying. And as Val said, the addition could have been a little smaller as well.
Right, it could have fit. That's my point.
I'm sorry?
It could have fit.
Sure, and it would have had anyone known. But, I mean, I don't practice law in Massachusetts, but, you know, to me, it's a hardship that was not self-created. We didn't do anything and knowingly violate. If you went out there and looked at the property, you would think, oh, that's way more than 35 feet back. And in fact, the house, as one of the members said, the house at the top of the street, when you look at that, is at least as close to the street appearance-wise as ours is.
I assume that they're probably taking their 35-foot setback from Westerwick or whatever that
Yeah, no,
other
I'm not
street
suggesting
is.
that they violated their setback, I'm just saying, at least, when you look down here, at least, it doesn't feel like this house is sticking out well in front of the other buildings.
Yeah, their front door is on Sackatcher, not
Right, but they could
Westerwick.
get frontage
You can
from
take your
Westerwick.
setback, yeah.
I think the issue, you know, if it's not clear, I mean, the issue that we're having, or at least I'm having, is that it's, to grant a variance, there are a lot of standards we're supposed to meet. Can't just be somebody made a mistake. I mean, it shouldn't, it's hard to meet that criteria. And that's why if it could be a special permit, it would, it's a much easier approval.
Right, but it can't, so.
Right, and that's the.
If everybody feels differently than I do, then, you know, we can vote it. If somebody else doesn't, we can still vote.
I have an idea.
Go ahead.
And I don't necessarily disagree with the way you're thinking, Lisa, but correct me if I'm mistaken, Mr. Reed. It looks like there's just under 500 square feet of ground cover available on this site.
I'll have to check the plan, but it sounds about right. The
418.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would be prepared to make a motion that we approve the variance relief under the condition that if there's any more construction on this site, the building has to be moved to a conforming location.
Construction or addition?
Addition.
Physical interior space addition?
Yeah. Well, an addition to the
Any
ground.
change to the house, period.
Okay, well,
Or-
because
or
they
a
were
new
suggesting
building.
some different things that they started to work on, so I just wanted to be,
Yeah, that was stairs, outside stairs from the deck.
from the second
From the rear
floor
deck
down.
In the setback?
No, that's what drove us to have the
Just
as-built
checking.
done. No,
This is
because I was
unusual
worried it
procedure.
was gonna be in the setback.
So would that constitute having to come back? I guess that's my question. Any change or anything that involves ground coverage?
I was thinking ground coverage, if you want to open the discussion on them.
No, I'm just clarifying which one, okay.
Well, what about if they come back to enclose that porch, or turn that porch into a living space? I would
That
think
would-
That would be ground
Lift the
coverage.
house up and move it.
It's a slippery slope myself. But, I mean, why wouldn't I, you know, again, I'm not saying that this is what happened at all, but if we start granting these types of things, why couldn't any porch be in the setback? Say, well,
Well, but they are, what about if you restrict their ground coverage? Well, that you are basically restricting what they have to come back. I mean, they're potentially giving up something to undo the mishap that happened by not being able to add any more ground coverage without further relief from.
well, not further relief. They would have to move the building.
Or
How
get
would you
further
say?
relief.
Would most likely.
Well, they can always ask for further relief.
We might as well see what's out there.
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
So, anybody want to second Michael's motion? To be clear, your motion is to grant the variance based on something.
Based on the fact that it's a non-conforming site that's got a restricted area to build in, or restricted in the zoning in the neighborhood, and that, for the record, no one wrote a letter or spoke in opposition to this application.
And the street only feeds one other person beyond this house. Is that right, or one or two? One. There's somebody else on the other side. How do they get to their house? Oh, I see. They enter much further down.
With the condition?
That they come back, they have to lift the house if they want to add any ground cover. And
Move it
move
within
into a
setback.
conforming location.
Yeah, or maybe complying with some other way.
Cover the porch.
Or chop the porch.
Or chop the
Yeah.
porch up.
Ground cover anywhere on the lot. Separate building, attachment, etc. I just want to be clear. Yeah.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I mean,
Aye.
I'm a nay, actually.
Okay.
I'll vote for it.
So, 4-1.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Always use a surveyor.
Yeah.
It's the smallest edition.
So, 2115 NHA Properties, Inc., 7 Surfside Road, for the applicant. Just identify yourself, please. I know who you are.
Sure. Ann Cuspa, Executive Director at Housing Nantucket. And today I'm here about 7 Surfside Road. This is in the CN zone, and it was changed in 2008 from R10. What I'm here to ask you is if you'll allow us to put a secondary dwelling on the lot. Let's see, I wanted to give you a little history about the lot. Housing Nantucket acquired the property in 2014 from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund of Nantucket. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund purchased the property in 2010. There's one dwelling on the lot right now, and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund ran a bunch of charrettes to try to figure out how can we maximize this lot for affordable housing purposes. I think you all probably are aware there's a dire need for affordable housing on the island, and Housing Nantucket's mission is to create affordable housing for island residents. So the design that was awarded, or I guess it was most desirable, had 5 structures on the lot and a shed. And then when the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was disposing of the property, they asked us to try to do that sort of arrangement where there were multiple single-family cottages on the lot. So this application before you today is to allow us to move one dwelling onto the lot. I'm in the process of applying for a LIP, which is a local initiative program. It's a state-run program. It's kind of part of the 40B law. So as you know, this is a LIP, LIP, means that the community supports this idea, and by community I mean local officials. So the selectmen have endorsed this concept of putting small cottages on this lot, as well as the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So while the LIP application is being reviewed at the state level, I need approval to move a second dwelling on there, because this second dwelling has been offered to our organization through house recycling, and that's one of the major contributors to how we can provide rental housing is through house recycling. So a house is donated to our organization, we put it on a truck, we move it to our site, rehab it, and then rent it out to the community. So I'm here today, but I'll be back in a couple months to ask for 4 dwellings on the site. But for today, I just need approval for 2 dwellings on the site. And the reason why we think that this site is so great, and it actually complies with many of the state initiatives for sustainable development, it is located close to the bike path, stores, post office, municipal buildings, across the street from the school, and it fits in well with the neighborhood. There's commercial and residential. Down the road, there's some small cottages, kind of the same kind of idea. So that's what I'm here to ask you, if you'll approve.
Thank you.
This is the site that at one point was the new school?
No.
No.
It's closer to the intersection of.
Right, okay, if you look at the overview map
right.
on page,
It's right on the exit
it's
of the high school.
literally
Oh,
across
it's
the street
one-
from the high
okay.
school.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
You see that?
Yep.
Okay, there is a, well, does anybody have any questions for Ann off the bat?
I have something I'd like to say. I did read this, and I'm familiar with it, and I'm concerned that this is going to take longer than I have today. And I noticed that Mark is in the back paying attention. Would it be okay if we swapped positions?
Sure. I guess. Is that kosher? Is that okay with you?
I don't mind if that's what you'd like. That's fine with me.
I'd be happy to, as long as we understand that I will not be here for the July meeting.
So, when do you have to leave?
5 minutes to 3.
Well, Ann, it's your choice, really, because Michael needs to leave. Mark won't be here. I would not call this just from my initial reading, a simple situation, and in that there are seemingly other elements to this plan that we haven't seen. It may very well be continued. So,
It would be continued until August.
well, July if you sit on it,
Yeah.
and August if Mark sits on it. So that, I'm not telling you what to do, but I guess it's your choice, and the sooner we make that choice, if Michael sits on it, we get to hear more.
I'd like Michael to sit on it.
Door number one?
So
Yes.
we probably will be continuing just before 5 to 3.
Understood.
Okay. Okay, anyway, so having said that, there is a letter in opposition, which hopefully everybody read. Is the letter writer here? Okay. So
right now, they need approval for 2 dwellings on this lot. For what reason? Why isn't it by right?
Because it's Cienzo.
It's in CN, it was rezoned, so it's pre-existing non-conforming as a residential use. There was always a dwelling there, it was there when they changed the zone.
Why did they change the zoning on places that are very residential?
The hospital, the laundromat,
well, there were 2, I mean, I'm not getting in your face because you didn't do this, but there were probably 2 commercial entities and 100 residential. And, well, you have a small,
A small business.
but that's more of a customary home occupation. You know,
Which is
why they do this is beyond me.
Beyond me.
It is just beyond me.
I can tell you that in, 2013, I believe you granted approval for the expansion of the residential use to the lot on the corner of Vesper Lane and Surfside Road. They were converting a garage into a second dwelling, and you did grant approval for that by special permit.
I'm debating the zoning that Plus continues to
I don't know why they'd want to
perpetrate
make
on the
this
town. But anyway,
And more commercial because it's so crowded.
I think at a minimum, for me, I would like to see a conceptual plan with all 4 dwellings and how the parking is going to work and how it's going to be screened and how the neighborhood is, how it's going to fit into the neighborhood. I understand you're under a time constraint vis-à-vis a donation, but I don't think that's any reason to burden the neighborhood if it turned into a burden. I'm not saying it will turn into a burden, but one neighbor has certainly expressed concern, and I have concern about, again, sort of doing something like this piecemeal,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you have to see all 4 units on the lot.
at least in conceptual form. In concern about parking, how do you get out of these parking areas to get onto Surfside Road? You certainly cannot back out, or we wouldn't approve anything which would require backing out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I do have a conceptual plan, but just thought that right at this time you just needed those 2 dwellings, and there is like a turnaround for the parking with 6, or is it, no, actually 8 spots, because there's 2 spots per dwelling, which I can share with you at another time.
Unfortunately, I don't think we'll get to it today, but maybe. Do you have it with you?
I do, yeah.
Well, why don't you at least put it into the record? While you're doing that, would you like to speak? Just, I don't mean to be rude, just introduce yourself for the tape.
Okay. Sally Ann Austin, 19 Surfside Road. Please use the microphone.
Yeah, please, you just come down to a mic. You can use this one. That one's live, please.
Sally Ann Austin, 19 Surfside Road. I just wanted to let you know that I spoke at length with the writers who got this, so we wrote the letter. Somehow I ended up being able to represent it. So the concerns that are in there are also not only my concerns, but the concerns of the neighbors who directly abut South Surfside. And we are concerned about the impact of traffic. And about, we heard there may be 4 units, then we heard it's 2, and now we're hearing 5. We haven't been really informed what's going on, but I know when I opened this salon, you guys absolutely crucified me.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far.
Especially Ed.
No! Can you strike that from the record, Terry?
Been around for 15 years.
I don't think she has, and she just downloaded it.
And a tree, I couldn't get rid of a tree either. And, but we are concerned because when I open the salon, I'm one person, I can only do 1 client an hour. And everybody was concerned about the contributing to an already congested traffic area. So you fast forward, we have double the amount of kids in the school system now. We've got a brand new hospital going in that corner. And if you're gonna add now 4 or 3 other housing units, that's at least 6 other cars in that intersection. With directly across from that house is the exit for the high school parking lot. We are kind of concerned about that and the impact. I mean, we've all lived there over 40 years. And now all of a sudden we're going to have a huge, I think it's like overuse of that land. Two houses we could see, 2 cottages we're fine with, but 4 I think is just overuse of that land. I would love to build a garage apartment on my land for my daughter, but I can't because I'm exceeding the ground usage. I think putting 5 cottages is definitely exceeding ground usage. And we also have I admit so much to the writers, but I have a concern because that was the animal hospital. And before they would even die, he was supposed to give me all the paperwork on that because there are animals buried there underneath that tree. And it was the animal burial ground, and people younger than me don't remember that being an animal hospital, but I do, and the parents do. So you're a little concerned with us about what's happening with that lot.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I have a slightly different recollection of those. We should see this, but I think what's going to happen, given the situation, is we need a lot more information. on what's going on. But we have another audience member who would like to speak. Please do.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Bogran, and I'm speaking as chair of the Community Preservation Committee. We have provided funding to Housing Nantucket, particularly for this project, because what's come to us and what we're completely aware of as a community is a dire need for affordable housing of any kind. And what's really important from our point of view when we looked at this is in a location where the infrastructure is in place, where bicycling is possible, the ability to walk to town, where there's public transportation, and there are public water and sewer. And so, subject to your review of the appropriate number of structures on this particular lot, as long as it fits within zoning, we're very much in support of providing this initiative, and we've made financial support from the community available to this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you.
How does the ground coverage vary between the
CN and before?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't asked that question in Ken, but I would just like to say, the specific request here that was advertised is for the second dwelling. She's not asking for a 40B now. She's just apprising you of the fact that that's what she's going to be doing. She will have to come back for
That's
40B.
what the lip is. It's a junior 40B.
The neighbor says she's okay with 2 dwellings. They are under a time constraint, pretty significant time constraint, truly, to move the house. And they'll have to pull building permits and get HDC and all of that. So, given that the only thing they're asking for today is that one dwelling moved onto the lot,
And which one is it?
rights to grant that.
Is it 1 or 2?
It's dwelling 2.
The larger of the 2.
Yes, it will become the primary dwelling.
Yeah.
Well, let me put it this way. If I were doing this
This is an
project,
existing dwelling.
and I was only going to get potentially only ask for 1 and then come back later, and the risk would be you would not get it,
Cut that off.
you might do something totally different than this. So I don't think that's a smart plan, but it's your choice. If you would like to, Michael is antsy, I can tell, but he's got 6 minutes. Oh, he said 5 up. Anyway, it's your choice. If you wanted to try to get a vote now, even though you've told us you want to put 4 units on there, I guess speak up. Because, but then you may very well not get the 4 units later on, or you may.
It's the commitment for the dwelling that's getting donated to me that's driving the application. So if the neighbor is happy with 2 dwellings, I certainly would want to be a good neighbor. And if you have concerns, maybe we can all work together to come up with a plan that might work better. Maybe it's not 4 dwellings. It's not 5 dwellings. Certainly 4. So that's what we would be shooting for.
So you're going to remove part of the existing dwelling, move it to the corner,
Right.
and then becomes the
And then a
main
new,
house.
And if that is the end, I'm not ready to vote on this, but if that were the end, that was all you're getting, that's what would happen. These lots would be in the corner, houses. You wouldn't do something differently if you knew you were only going to get 2 buildings.
So I guess then we would move them forward, but still we would only get 2 dwellings.
Yeah, Ed's point is that you might not want to put them back here.
You
so
might wanna-
you might want to not rush the decision, because if you put the buildings in the back and for some reason you don't get the 40B or the LIP, whatever it's called, that you probably would have given each dwelling a little bit more breathing room, and you might have done the parking differently. And so
yeah.
you're getting the building, which I know is probably very important as a donated structure.
What's the timing on the building? I mean, you've got to go through the building permit application. You've got to move this building on site, then you have to move the building over the road.
Right, and
Do you
we're,
propose to do all this?
so we've gotten HDC approval to get the building moved on the site. That happened in December. We got approval to get the building moved from 13 Nantucket to the site. That happened from HDC. That happened in December. Toscana's going to be doing the work. We have a safety plan to cordon off the site with fencing and make sure that it all happens during the summer. In other words, the building's moved on site. We have to do some sewer connects. So we wanted to get that done while school was out and prepare the site for the buildings to get moved in September.
So the over the road would take place in September.
Right.
Take the minutes of the meeting from the time I leave to the time this application is on,
Yes.
and circulate them when they're available? Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, so you are not planning to take this until September?
Well, yeah, I mean, the permitting process takes so long. Plus, there's blackout dates over the summer.
No, I understand
Okay.
that. So I guess I'm not feeling, I think that,
You're not feeling the rush.
I'm not feeling that it's in your best interest to rush this, but it's up to you. You've lost one voting member. But even if you continue this process without a vote today to the July meeting, it doesn't sound, I think you could probably make a relatively, well, I don't know if you'd want to make a firm commitment to take the building or not, but you'd have to weigh whether or not you're comfortable at least with the two buildings on the property, and if that were the end, you're going to get this building donated to you. So I don't necessarily feel the huge, I don't feel ready to vote on this today.
How big is this building that's being moved?
818 square foot of ground coverage is what it says on the plan.
And it has been HDC approved. We don't normally get into what it looks like, but you could go to the HDC clearly, and obviously you can talk to Ann and try to find out more of what's going on specifically, which I think you should be sharing this with the neighbors, frankly. But anyway, how does everyone feel? We want to try to push this to a vote today, or
I don't think, not if you're not comfortable with it.
Make a motion to continue to July.
all right? But let's give Ann some guidance as to what we might be looking for. If indeed you're going to try for the lip, I think you should be talking to the neighbors and see if you can get neighborhood support versus opposition. If your application is only for two dwellings, again, just show the park, show us how it all works, and I know you did to some extent.
Yeah, that parking doesn't seem adequate, though, in
No.
terms of, I don't think the parking plan that you've submitted for the two dwellings makes sense at this point, because it looks like it would be very hard for that last person to get out.
It'd be impossible to back
So,
without
yeah,
backing.
to back out. So I think you need to rework your parking plan, and I agree with Ed, we should be looking for some screening, potentially, right? Just a little bit of,
What do you mean by that? Plant screening or on the road? Like privet or?
Well, something to, just when we're giving somebody relief, if we were to go that route, we sort of want to see everything and see what's going to happen. Not a very, an application with not too much information. And so the more you can show us, the more, I think it's things like if you really are ultimately going to try to get 4 buildings on there, I think things that will come up if you go that route are, how many people are in those buildings? Are they, it's really bedrooms more than building number. It could be 4 buildings with 1 bedroom in each, and that's the same as 2, or much less than 2 4-bedrooms. So, just the more specific information we have, the better off you're going to be, ultimately.
The whole thing with the site is in CN zone, you can build an apartment building in there. And we were told or persuaded, I don't know, encouraged to go for the single-family dwellings and do a LIP there by the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Selectmen. So that's why we went with this. It would be, I think, cheaper for us to try to do an apartment building there, but because they wanted us to do the single families. But, you know, I don't know if that sounds like something you guys maybe would rather have see an apartment building.
Not at all. We're not saying that at all. All we're, you know, we look at a very narrow set of criteria, if you will. And if you can build an apartment building as a matter of right, you don't have to come to us.
Right.
We don't have a, I mean, we all do probably have personal preferences as to what we would like to see, but that's not specifically what, we're not saying at all. We'd like to see you put, I don't think, an apartment building up.
I mean, that's what
I doubt that's what the neighbors are thinking.
But that's the alternative. If I can't do this, we have to do an apartment building.
Are we, you know, again, whether or not we all agree with the town zoning, if you can do it as a matter of right, you can do it as a matter of right. But once you come here, we're simply asking to see more information. How is the impact of 4 buildings on this site mitigated in terms of the neighborhood? You know, just stuff like that. How many bedrooms? Where are the cars all going to be? Because as we all know, everybody seems to have a car. I know that not everybody does, but...
Well, I do want to say I do appreciate it being multiple buildings as opposed to one building. I don't think that CN zoning district that allows apartment buildings makes any sense in these locations, and I'm not so sure why it was. You know, this is a very small scale neighborhood, so I'm much more in favor of this. But to Ed's point, you could, if you can build the other thing by right and have to avoid us, then there's a certain amount of advantage to that.
But we're not advocating that. I like the multiple building thing too versus an apartment building. It's just that, you know, our job is to try to take as much into account as possible, including the neighborhood.
And the effect of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Particularly
I
here,
appreciate that.
It's a very difficult intersection.
No, I understand.
And
it is
I'm
a
sure
concern.
you want to be a good neighbor too.
Absolutely.
I'm sure of that. So
It's better for affordable housing in general for us to take the neighbors' concerns seriously. So I would like to work with the neighbors.
So maybe, if nothing else, in the next month, you guys can get together, the riders, whomever might have an interest in this.
And look at, I mean, you probably haven't seen the plan with the 4 buildings on it, so maybe you guys can talk about it and talk about your plans. The reasoning for, obviously you're trying to save that big tree, which makes sense in terms of how you're doing the parking.
That's right.
But,
and if that's a burial ground, I mean, even more reason to not to build there.
Just little things, all the little pieces that make for what hopefully is a great development versus I can just put a apartment building here and, yeah. Does that seem reasonable to the neighborhood for now?
So I guess I have a question about if, what I don't know the right term, but if there's you can appeal it within a certain amount of time. So I had until September 8th if it was approved today. So my understanding then would be we would have to wait until after that appeal period was done before a building permit would be issued. So if we get delayed till July, sounds like the appealing period would be over in October, so there'd be no way.
No.
Okay.
From the date the decision is filed with the town clerk, so you get approved on July 9th, for instance. I draft the decision, get it signed as quickly as possible after that, if you request that we do it that way. And then there's a 20-day, it's technically 22 days from the day that I walk that decision to the town clerk and she stamps it. So on the 22nd day, you can walk it down to the registry of deeds, record it, and then go back to the building department.
And get the permit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different ball of wax, but it's 20 days from the date of filing of the signed decision with the town clerk.
Mm-hmm.
Not 2 months.
And you cannot, Eleanor, correct me if I'm wrong, can you, or answer this, can you apply for a building permit at your own risk without the variance?
well, you probably can apply, but they won't issue it.
No, if you're in line and you're trying to time it, game the system, as they say, people do that, especially when there was a backlog. There was a significant backlog in the winter. A lot of people did that. But it's not recommended, and if Steve Butler or someone comes upon your application and it's not complete, he'll put it right back to the end. And it will irritate him, so it's not worth it.
There is certainly some risk that you will not be ready on September 8th with the way that it's been taking a long time to get a building permit, even if your paperwork is all in. They have in mind, I understand, hired a new building inspector to try to expedite that process. But again, typically, we hear your or any applicant's concern about the emergency aspect of everything,
Yep.
but we're not going to necessarily, as Kiram said earlier, unless the building were to be falling into the ocean, it's hard.
And the other thing is, if they do come back with a 40B style application, that never happens in one hearing anyway.
Right.
Well, that I knew was going to take longer. I didn't know what to expect for this approval, so I understand you
But it
need.
might be helpful for you to know if that 40B process will be favorable or smoother, depending on what your neighbors, the neighborhood.
I mean, this is a complicated issue right now. And I'm talking island-wide. We need the housing, but, increasing
How you do it in
density
in each
issues.
neighborhood is.
That's it, and we don't have any land, so when we were given the land by the trust fund, it just makes sense for us to try to do as much as we can with the amount of land that we have. So that's why we wanted to do the 4 dwellings there. And the other, with house recycling, it's hard to find a perfect footprint to fit on the lots that we are given too, and this was a good dwelling, in good shape, with money from the donor, so that's why I was wanting to, get the decision quickly, but I understand I don't want to rush you either, so if you need another month to think about it, and I'll work with Sally Ann, then that'd be good.
The other option is you can vote today to grant the request for relief. She does not have to exercise it. If she goes back to her board and they say, well, let's consider this, taking into consideration your advice, they don't have to exercise it. She can come back, they can withdraw, or just simply not exercise it and come back with a separate application that reflects.
I'm not comfortable granting the relief based on the site plan that's in the file, though.
Right.
Just because of the parking. The parking doesn't work. So I think we would need more information to grant the relief because of that. At least that's my.
I mean, I'm not a landscape designer by any means, but, it seems like there might be a better plan than this, even, so it seems like it just needs a little more thought.
Okay.
I don't know.
So you want to see a landscape plan?
Not per se.
What I'm looking for is a parking plan that works. I don't know how anybody else feels about the parking plan.
This one doesn't work.
That are 7 by 17.
You can do that.
I know, but it's just the tight.
Doesn't make any sense.
You can't get
Well,
out.
this one, the 7 by 17,
have
maybe
to
a
back
little,
out.
one of those little Fiats can back out, but, I mean, not back out, but get
Do a regular turn.
an 18-point turn and get out, but, it just needs a little more thought. I think we've made it,
Okay.
I hope,
Can I
clear.
make a motion
Okay.
to continue?
Yeah. To the July 9th meeting.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
And, thank you. So, any further discussion? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So, hopefully, you guys can get together and at least be made aware of what's going on.
Does Eleanor need to keep this?
Yeah, you should keep that. Can we keep this in?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Can you?
Yeah.
Did you not like something, or is there some direction on what you'd like to see changed?
On this?
On that
Well, I
one?
didn't really
Oh,
look
we
at
didn't
it
really look at that one.
closely, but,
Because you're not going in front of, we're not discussing this now.
Right.
So could you specify for her exactly what you want her to come back within a month?
A parking plan that works for the 2 units, which is all
A
there.
couple of options.
Yeah.
we would have a greater comfort level, certainly. I don't think there's any question you get the second dwelling on the
No,
building, on the lot.
there's no question of that.
So, I think you can take comfort in that, small comfort. You would get this relief. We would just want to see a better parking plan if this indeed is what your end game is.
It might make sense, Ann, to speak to the neighbors and explain to them exactly what you might have the rights to do. And it would probably work out better for everybody if you guys could come to some sort of agreement on something along these lines, rather than what might be another option for you guys.
Yeah.
Probably more appealing to them.
Okay.
I
So
know it's hard, the chicken and egg thing, and it's very difficult, especially on Nantucket, but again, I think you can take comfort. You definitely will be able to get two buildings on that if you want four, or an apartment building, or whatever you want to do. Just try to get further along in the planning.
you were saying you didn't think that if there was 2 dwellings there, that might not be the best siting for them, but if...
He was saying that
No.
hypothetically.
I
Okay.
said hypothetically, if we were to grant the relief today, based on this, and that's where the buildings were going to go, and the neighbor knew that, and so she took comfort, I'm not saying you did, but took comfort in that, and then all of a sudden, your 4-house plan was different than this, and you wanted to move,
Well, that was before we knew you had this, which clearly takes into account where you're putting the building.
Yeah, and the neighbor hasn't seen that,
Yeah,
so...
exactly. So, I mean, they had thought about it, and that's why the current...
No, I know, but I'm
At the
saying
time,
if
we
you
didn't say
didn't get the 4 ultimately, would this be where you wanted 2? Or would you want 2 bigger buildings, or et cetera, et cetera?
When the people donate the houses to us, then we try to make them work, so
I got you.
probably would want greater separation. But hopefully we'll get the lip.
Well, I just, we've already voted this, and it's already finished, but the lip, didn't we vote for this? Did we?
I made a motion.
Oh.
I don't know if it-
All right, well, we didn't, so
I
which
think
is
we did
fine.
vote on it.
No, we didn't. We did.
I think we
I
did.
can remember.
No, the lip is just like the 40B. In other words, you basically, or is it the same sort of rules and regs that we labor under, Eleanor?
I'm not familiar with the LIP program.
This is the first lip on the island.
Well, what I'm
Lip application.
getting at is that, at least with a regular 40B, it would have to be extraordinary, there would have to be extraordinary circumstances for us to be able to refuse it, to turn it down, because there are statutory or steps you can or take if we do something that is makes it economically unfeasible for them. Just an FYI, you might want to look into that. So what the playing field's all about. No, I'm not. I will say, I think the board has done a reasonable job of taking the 40B applications that have come before us and tried to tailor them as much as we can to be good subdivisions within state law. This isn't a Nantucket thing. It's a state law, and just you should make yourself aware of it. Is all I'm saying. It's not a threat. I'm not threatening. I'm just saying I would take
We don't
time.
have a lot of control, though. They don't
We
actually
ha-
have to
we-
meet zoning.
We have some control, and we
Not a-
try to do our best.
Right.
But I'm not familiar with LIP too much. You have something to say, sir?
Yes, I just have one procedural question. This is a commercial lot, is it not?
Yeah.
We're not going to be handling commercial permits anymore, correct? So they're
Commercial
for the
uses.
planning board?
Commercial use.
Okay, not commercial lot, commercial uses.
Yeah. No, all I was saying was take the time to, just I would. I'm going to.
It's not a threat.
It's not a threat at all.
It's just a way for more affordable housing to be built, so it's a law.
Yeah, it's a state law that we cannot circumvent. Again, unless it is so egregious, and even then, it's very difficult.
Because the threshold for housing, or for Nantucket to meet, is 10% of all of our housing stock, year-round housing stock, needs to be affordable, and we're at 2.5% island-wide. So because we're so far below what the state mandates us to have, then a affordable housing developer has the ability to bypass zoning. But, you have to come to ZBA for an approval of a comprehensive permit, and then that's when the neighbors can put in their input and whatnot. But if ZBA denied the application, it could go up to the state, and we could challenge it up at the state, and it's highly unlikely that it would hold.
2.5% is actually the actual figure?
That's right.
Yeah, so that's a state law that was put into place a long time ago, and again, my understanding is relatively rudimentary, but we are able to try to make it work within our community up to a point.
Well, as I said, we're not against two. When you start getting into, when we first heard about it, it was going to be 2 duplexes, 4 families.
Well, again, the difference between... Well, it's all in the number of bedrooms, frankly, not the number of buildings. But I think we voted on this, we've talked about it. I was just sort of trying to say, you got a month, let's let everybody learn a little bit more about it and move on. So.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's, oh no, that was withdrawn.
I think we're going to make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, so moved, or who seconds that? Somebody, I know
I'll
you
second
did.
it.
I signed that one.
Aye.
Which one's this?
It's not your line.
Okay, are we off the record?